Good afternoon, colleagues. I invite you to complete the sentence that you're on at the moment so that we can get going with this afternoon's presentation. What time is it, by the way? 3:07. The agenda says we have until 5:30, or almost there. Is that correct? That's what I saw. Dr. Costa, I think you have some updates for us.
My apologies. I was walking around trying to. I was walking around trying to round up folks to come into the sanctuary so that we could get started. Not on time because it's too late for that. But I wanted to remind you of a couple of things that are happening today and then what will be happening in the morning. So today at 5:30 in your bags, there is an invitation from TCU for the Horned Frog reception at the Bearded Lady. Frogs and beers, bearded lady, I don't know. That's at 5:30. And then at 7:30, we have our second worship service. So please, wherever you go for dinner, please do try to come back on time so that we can be prompt and begin at 7:30. Tomorrow, if you signed up for the Women in Ministry breakfast, that will be happening at 8 o'clock in the morning. So tomorrow we'll begin. If you are a female in ministry and have signed up for that breakfast, we'll begin at 8 o'clock. And then our next lecture, the Davis workshop, will begin at 9 o'clock. So I just wanted to remind you of the things that are happening in the next tonight and tomorrow. So, Dean?
Thank you much.
Thank you, sir.
So it is my pleasure to introduce to you an impressively multifaceted person I consider a friend. Dr. Corey D.B. Walker is Dean of Wake Forest University School of Divinity, Wake Forest Professor of the Humanities, and Director of the Program in African American Studies. Dean Walker, who received his academic preparation at Norfolk State University, the Samuel DeWitt Proctor School of Theology of Virginia Union University, Harvard University, and the College of William and Mary, has an extensive record of scholarly accomplishment, academic leadership, and social activism. His research, teaching, and public scholarship spans the eras of American and African American social and religious thought, ethics, and religion and American public life. He's author and editor of several books and has published over 60 articles, essays, and book chapters in a wide variety of scholarly journals and publications. He's currently completing his next book, Disciple of Nonviolence, Wyatt T. Walker and the Struggle for the Soul of Democracy. It will be published by the University of Virginia Press. Interestingly, he also co-directed and co-produced the documentary film Fifeville with acclaimed artist and filmmaker Kevin Jerome Everson. Dr. Walker served as Vice President, Dean, and Professor of Religion and Society at the Samuel DeWitt Proctor School of Theology at Virginia Union University, was founding Dean of the College of Arts, Sciences, Business, and Education, and inaugural John W. and Anna Hodgins Haynes Professor of the Humanities at Winston-Salem State University, and chair of the Department of Africana Studies at Brown University, where he was also a tenured professor and faculty affiliate in the Department of American Studies, Department of Religious Studies, Center for Latin American Caribbean Studies. I mean, imagine yes, and Center for the Study of Race and Ethnicity, and Committee on Science and Technology Studies. Impressively multifaceted, I said. He served as a faculty member in the Department of Religious Studies and the Carter G. Woodson Institute of African American and African Studies at the University of Virginia, and was inaugural director of the Center for the Study of Local Knowledge established by the Carter G. Woodson Institute with support from the Ford Foundation. This is the only research center in the country dedicated to new and innovative research related to the concept of local knowledge. Dean Walker has served as visiting professor in a number of universities in the United States and in Europe. Dr. Walker has been a consultant with the Intrust Center for Theological Schools, and he has served as founding president of the Center for Faith, Justice and Reconciliation, and was senior fellow of religious freedom at the Freedom Forum Institute. He was also a member of the United States Institute of Peace, International Religious Freedom Policy, Finding Common Ground to Advance Peace and Stability Working Group. He's an ordained American Baptist clergy person. And in fact, he was doing both academy and clergy person work as he traveled toward us to make the presentation, Abolition Christianity, Ministry Beyond Empire. Please receive Dean Walker.
Thank you so much, my dear brother Michael. We have traveled a long path together and find ourselves back together, and I want to thank you for extending this invitation and thank the Bright Divinity School for welcoming me to Texas. I've been in Texas now since Saturday. Started a trip that began in San Antonio, visited with some of our Wake Forest University School of Divinity alumni in that area, then moved up to Austin to visit with some of our friends in Austin, then over to Dallas, where we visited with some more of our friends in Dallas, and really the beautiful moment of the trip is to come over here to Fort Worth and be here at Bright for this afternoon's lecture. I had an opportunity to view this morning's presentations, and of course they have really been challenging, bracing, and bold. And in many ways, that boldness is a hallmark of Bright Divinity School. So in keeping with that bold tradition of Bright, we are going to talk about Abolition Christianity, Ministry Beyond Empire. Let me do one thing. This lecture is inspired by two epigraphs. One from the Gospel of Luke, very famous passage in Luke, the 4th chapter, the 18th through the 19th verses, that reads as follows. The Spirit of the Lord is upon me because he has anointed me to preach good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim release to the captives and recovery of sight to the blind, to set at liberty those who are oppressed, to proclaim the acceptable year of the Lord. The other quote comes to us from that great theorist of religion, that grand scholar, none other than Charles H. Long. While the reformist structure of the Enlightenment has mounted a polemic against the divisive meaning of religion in Western culture and set forth alternate meanings for the understanding of the human, the same ideological structures through various intellectual strategies paved the ground for historical and evolutionary thinking, racial theories, and forms of color symbolism that made the economic and military conquest of various cultures and peoples justifiable and defensible. Abolition Christianity, ministry beyond empire. A strong people do not need strong leaders. Bright Divinity, let me say that again. A strong people do not need strong leaders. These words from Norfolk, Virginia born and Shaw University educated freedom fighter Ella Baker crystallizes a world-creating, life-affirming, and soul-stirring vision that goes to the very foundation of our belief and our existence. Baker held an indomitable faith in the power of everyday people, not the legitimate leaders, but the regular people who have the power within themselves to transform the terrain of existence both dramatically and fundamentally. Baker properly instructs us on the task of ministry as a critical and acute analyst of the normative, heteropatriarchal, and hierarchical powers that inhere within our normal understandings and our dominant frameworks of ministry. Lest we forget, for 9 decades, this event was termed Ministers' Week, and for a significant time of its existence, was normatively aligned to a singular male figure, representative, and most importantly, the very symbol of Christian ministry. In an age of empire where we continue to value and valorize the heroic individual, the iconic personality, and the singular person over and against the infinite gift of God's children and of God's creation, Ella Baker's instruction continues to critically instruct. Reflecting on Ella Baker's words, I'm reminded by a statement from 1968 by Charles Long. The visibility of the black community, Long would write. The visibility of the black community in America is our challenge and opportunity to develop a theology of freedom, a freedom for humanity, a new humanity. Long raises a foundational possibility with his statement of the visibility of black people and the possibility of a new humanity. For Long, the question is not one of addition. It is not one of inclusion, for as Malcolm reminds us, why would I want to be included in a burning house? It is rather a foundational and fundamental reconfiguration of what it means to be human in the world. He echoes the sentiments of Martin Luther King Jr., who offered this often overlooked comment. And one day, historians of this era might be able to say there lived a great black people who injected new meaning into civilization. It is this new meaning, a new humanity, that serves as an index for Long's thought, that captures the essence of Ella's instruction and reminds us that this is the line of thinking that we are pursuing in this ministry week and in our walks in ministry. And just what if this new humanity emerged not from those representative and respectable Christians who grace the pages of our theological books and are extolled as exemplars for the faithful, but rather what happens if it comes from ordinary folk, black folk, brown folk, queer folk, folk without power or privilege, folk without power or position, folk without standing or status, folk without sanction, and folk who are not sanctified. Abolition Christianity. Abolition Christianity is a new sensibility of the human being and belonging in the world by way of an untimely theological thinking that can be anchored in a critical rememory of Karl Barth's 1911 theological declaration that Jesus is the movement for social justice, and the movement for social justice is Jesus in the present. Yes, that's Karl Barth, 1911. Abolition Christianity, a disruption of the imperial logics, colonial legacies, and deadly discourses of a new world Constantinian Christianity unleashed in the maelstrom of modernity. Abolition Christianity disrupt the centuries-long condition elegantly captured by George Lamming in his mid-20th century classic, In the Castle of My Skin. We started to think about the empire more than we thought about the garden, Lamming writes. And then nothing mattered but the empire. But they have put the two of them together now, the empire and the garden. We are to speak of them the same way. They belong to the same person. They both belong to God. The garden is God's own garden, and the empire is God's only empire. They work together for us. God save the King, who will help us see the garden again. That's all we have to think about now, the empire and the garden. Abolition Christianity, inspired by W.E.B. Du Bois's conception of abolition democracy in his monumental 1935 classic Black Reconstruction, and its critical retrieval and rearticulation in the thought of Angela Davis. Much as Davis's unfinished lecture on Liberation II, where she revisited the textual site of Frederick Douglass's liberation in his narrative of the life of Frederick Douglass, an American slave, where she interpreted it as a key for thinking the history and theory of freedom in the modern world. Her thinking of abolition democracy contests the very foundations of democracy that are tethered to a low-intensity, formalized, and stylized ritual and tradition. Her rethinking of the notion of democracy reminds us of her powerful statement that the notion of democracy has been fashioned into something like a commodity that can be exported, sold, or imposed upon entire populations. She may also be speaking of Christianity. Abolition Christianity is inconvenient. Abolition Christianity is disruptive. Abolition Christianity is disturbing. It interrupts the smooth textures of the ordinary. It rips the fabric of the given. It disrupts the normal and destroys the order of things. It unleashes a beautiful creative chaos of the new into existence. Yet abolition Christianity's arrival is not chronologically given, nor is it temporally contained. But before we continue on this, let's deal with some preliminary matters. Let's begin by saying we are living through a very dangerous time. Everyone in this room, everyone in this sanctuary is in one way or another aware of that. We are in a revolutionary situation, no matter how unpopular that word has become in this country. So my citizens of this country who figures themselves responsible, and particularly those of you who deal with the minds and hearts of young people, must be prepared to go for broke. Or to put it another way, you must understand that in the attempt to correct so many generations of bad faith and cruelty, when it is operating not only in the classroom, but in society, you will meet the most fantastic, the most brutal, and the most determined resistance. These words come from James Baldwin's A Talk to Teachers. It is most important to begin to place this talk at the beginning as we formally begin to uncover and delineate an initial discourse on abolition Christianity. You see, Baldwin is a barometer of American democracy, gauging the deep pressures at work in the social, cultural, and political fabric of the nation. He does not flinch at the task of the intellectual to speak truth to power, and as Amilcar Cabral would say a couple of years later, tell no lies and claim no easy victories. Baldwin sets the agenda for abolition Christianity. For his A Talk to Teachers lays out a task not only for teachers, but for those of us who have chosen to take up the cross and respond to the call of the prophets to do justice, love mercy, and walk humbly with God. Ours is not a Christianity of the empire that continues to exhibit what Sylvia Wynter aptly terms Sepulveda syndrome, named after the 16th century Spanish theologian who argued that the Spaniards had a right to enslave the indigenous Americans because the latter were culturally inferior. This fueled a Christianity where Western man alone had the property of humanness, and by a process of repetition, humanity came to be synonymous with being European, with the possession of European culture. To be non-European was to be non-human. The I became God, and the not I became the heretic. And while the disappearance of the signs, symbols, and systems of indigenous and African chattel slavery and segregation and the laws and policies mandating integration may have served as harbingers of an arrival of a new society, abolition Christianity awaits. Perhaps this is best captured in the words of Howard Thurman from his wonderful and overlooked volume, The Luminous Darkness. While he was raking leaves of a white resident, Thurman rehearses an encounter with the daughter of his employer, who, when Thurman admonished her to stop messing up the leaves he had just raked, she took a pen and pricked him on the hand and stated, "That did not hurt you. You can't feel." Thurman reflects, in other words, I was not human. Nor was I even a creature capable of feeling pain. It indicates the social and psychological climate in which it would be possible for a little girl to grow up in a Christian family and in a Christian nation. Segregation guarantees such inhumaneness and throws wide the door for a complete range of socially irresponsible behavior. Thurman realizes that Christianity, abolition Christianity, is much deeper than a change of law and policy, a stylistic change of affect or aesthetic, a shift in custom or condition. It is far deeper and transforms the very fabric of society. He underscores this statement and this sentiment in his often overlooked essay of 1945, The Fascist Masquerade. It is there where Thurman writes, Christianity is irrevocably committed to a revolutionary ethic, but it tends to implement that ethic by means that are short of being revolutionary. The church must be as revolutionary in practice as it is in the genius of the ethic to which it is dedicated. Let us turn to Irenaeus, that theologian of the early church, who vigorously defends an embodied faith that reaffirms the meaning and significance of human being made in the likeness of God. Irenaeus possessed a childlike enthusiasm and delight in the materiality of the material, the physicality of the physical, and the bodiliness of the body. For human beings to be created in the image of God is, for Irenaeus, a foundational theme of the whole biblical narrative. Irenaeus draws our attention to the very mud of creation, the earthiness of human being, in all of its embodiment, in all of its diversity. What happens to a theological imagination that not only forgets this aspect of the human, but arrests the development of the human, of the image of God, to a singular modality? We are not only talking about whiteness as supremacy, white fragility, rather we are dealing with matters that Paul Tillich calls of ultimate concern. It is not simply about race and Christianity. It is about abolition Christianity, about redefining, rethinking, re-theologizing the very idea of the human and the very idea of creation. With abolition Christianity, we open up a new window. For Christianity facilitates a deep anti-human logic that permeates our principles, our practices, and our piety. And thus, although we may desegregate our polity, we may be righteously woke with all the buzzwords of the day and all of its accordant dominant readings and key speakers. We may have even desegregated our schools. We may even have occasionally desegregated our pulpits and our pews, but we have not desegregated God. That is why, with Thurman, we still exhibit a critical inability to understand the pain of the black, the pain of the immigrant, the pain of the Sudanese, the pain of the Haitian, and yes, the pain of the Palestinian. It is what Sylvia Winters so long and eloquently ago reminded us of in her open letter to her Stanford University colleagues in the wake of the 1992 Rodney King verdict, when she wrote, "You may have heard a radio news report which aired briefly during the days of the jury's acquittal of the policeman in the Rodney King beating case. The report stated that the public officials of the judicial system of Los Angeles routinely used the acronym NHI, that jobless, to refer to a breach of the rights of young black males who belong to the jobless category of the inner city ghettos. NHI means no humans involved. Now we live in the wake of knees on necks and of cries of "I cannot breathe." God breathed life into all bodies in Genesis, only for those who cannot recognize or who refuse to recognize the likeness of God in black bodies, brown bodies, female bodies, gay bodies, transgender bodies, migrant bodies, impoverished bodies, and imprisoned bodies. Abolition Christianity reminds us of the links from the slave patrol to state-sanctioned violence of the carceral state, to planetary war, and the degradation of our climate. The time has come for abolition Christianity. The time has come for us to rethink the very foundations of the faith. For we can think of this in a matter along what we may term the Matthew 18 imperative. We have to see people as the likeness of God. We have to love people in the likeness of God. We have to stand in solidarity with all people who are the image of God. We have to rebuild a world for all people who are our siblings. And we do so cognizant of Matthew 18. At that time, the disciples came to Jesus and asked, "Who then is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven?" He called a little child to him and placed the child among them. And he said, "Truly I tell you, unless you change and become like little children, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. Therefore, whoever takes the lowly position of this child is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. And whoever welcomes one such child in my name welcomes me." The Matthew 18 imperative calls us to return and renew our affection with the child and all of the sentient flesh of the image of God. We have to engage the world and a new humanity with a childlike curiosity and materiality outside of a hierarchy, outside of a privilege, and most importantly, with a welcoming hospitality that welcomes and hosts the deep difference of each and every one of us. In this light, the familiar words of the 4th chapter of the Gospel of Luke ring anew. The Spirit of the Lord is upon me because he has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim freedom for the prisoners and recovery of sight for the blind, to set the oppressed free. You see, it was an unlikely child who came back to his home and read from a sacred scroll, a scroll ensnared in ritual, tradition, and the practices which sought to circumscribe the very essence of all of reality for all time. An unlikely figure reads a word encrusted with decades of meaning and seeking to define definitively the boundaries of community. An unlikely figure who speaks of a world that was thought within a temporality not of the present, but a temporality of Lavinia, a temporality of that which is to come, promising of a new time. Who authorized this new time? Who anointed this child, this Jesus, who was neither prophet nor priest, with neither power nor position? He was but a local boy. Don't we remember him? He was from an unknown and migrant family of questionable status, if you can call it that. A marginal figure in a world governed by a politics of empire. A radical and heretical figure who goes through the ritual that has governed his life and the life of the community, but with a dramatic transformative change, he reads a word and pronounces a new world. It is not only untimely, it is the essence of the good news. It is a fleshed freedom in the word and the work of a movement. It is a freedom that is disruptive from a world born from the transformation of people into property. It is a freedom that comes from an unlikely place. It is about a freedom spoken by unlikely people. It is freedom anchored that moves to a temporality of a new world. And it is the essence of the community of the faithful to speak a word, to embark on a journey of this freedom, this abolition Christianity, for it is an invitation for all of us to join in that holy crusade for freedom that is the core of the religion of Jesus. It does not matter who you are, the invitation is extended. It does not matter what you do, the invitation is extended. It does not matter your family background, the invitation is extended. It does not matter where you live, the invitation is extended. It does not matter how much money you have, the invitation is extended. It does not matter where you study, the invitation is extended. For we are all invited to join together, to pray together, to worship together, to live together, to embody this word and take up this work of abolition Christianity. And when we do this work of abolition Christianity, of loving, liberating, life-affirming Christianity, God may be replaced from the God of empire to a God of liberation. And our congregations may move from being churches of empire and become communities of care. Freedom is often forestalled when we choose not to speak of abolition Christianity, For liberation is rendered as being comfortable with oppression, and the revolution, it means that we are going to continue with the status quo. Instead, abolition Christianity calls us to a world that we may not be accustomed to. It does not express itself in the founding documents of this nation, nor in the luminous rhetoric of our public representatives. To respond to this call means that we need to stand, to speak, and to struggle for a new world together. For the Spirit of the Lord is upon all of us, because he has anointed us to proclaim good news to the poor. He has sent us to proclaim freedom for the prisoners and recovery of sight for the blind, to set the oppressed free. It is in this moment of historic inequality, environmental degradation, and a world at war that abolition Christianity calls the people of God to take up a fresh and new meaning of community, and one that opens up the gospel for the entire world. Yes, bright divinity, we are the ones we have been waiting for that Spirit of the Lord is on us. This is not just another ministry week for a series of programs, lectures, speeches, and reunions. It is a call to build a new world. Today is the beginning of our journey together. Yes, it is time for all of us, the big, wide circle of we, to become abolitionists, to preach abolition Christianity, to enact an untimely freedom that redefines reality, an untimely freedom that does not confuse style with substance, tradition with truth, progress without struggle, an untimely freedom that's not bound up with what we do in our congregations on Sunday, but walks with Jesus on Monday, marches for righteousness on Tuesday, speaks truth to power on Wednesday, stands in solidarity with the disinherited on Thursday, loves and comforts the marginal, the forgotten, the disinherited on Friday, and testifies with our very lives to do justice, love mercy, and walk humbly with our God, each and every Saturday and every day. My sisters and brothers, my siblings of all stripes, abolition Christianity is not about reform. As Ruth Wilson Gilmore reminds us, this is about a non-reformist reform. And we understand where it comes from. For it does not seek to rearrange the tables. It overturns the tables in a transvaluation of the world and of humanity. It speaks prophetically with Amos, but let justice run down like water and righteousness like a mighty stream. Abolition Christianity is a fleshed freedom, one that's best captured in the words of that African-American spiritual, when enslaved New World Africans mustered the breath, harnessed the courage, and affirmed their humanity to sing, "O freedom, O freedom, O freedom, how I love thee. And before I will be a slave, I will be buried in my grave and go home to my Lord and be free." For this is the gospel to which we dedicate our lives. This is ministry beyond empire. And when we all say, "The Spirit of the Lord is on me, because he has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim freedom for the prisoners and recovery of sight for the blind, to set the oppressed free," we become abolitionists, and we remind ourselves of our faith, and that is abolition Christianity. Amen.
continue our expressions of gratitude by the responses that we make, the questions we ask, the commentary that we direct to Dean Walker. I will be dashing around the place, keeping fit, giving you a chance to use the mic. So, who is going to be first? Or do you need a moment of contemplation?
Thank you so very much. So as you talk about abolition faith and you proclaim the mighty words from Micah 6:8, how do you foresee us actually living into that in a culture that is opposed to wokeness, in a culture that is opposed to a Jesus that says, feed the hungry, care for the sick? Can you give us a vision of living into that, please?
The vision is this week. This is a vision taken ministry in the age of empire. So it's a recognition of the context that is the always already condition of Christianity. Christianity is a religion born in empire. Christianity is a religion that has traveled the world on the reins of empire. And those Christians who kept hold to and kept faithful with the vision were those who came up against the empire. This isn't something new. This isn't something that we're freshly confronting in this age. This is why we have to go back and retrieve that tradition of abolition Christianity. Much like Du Bois retrieves the tradition of abolition democracy. It was a short-lived moment, but it gave a vision of a new world. When Angela Davis reached back over the decades and pulled abolition democracy out of Du Bois's overlooked 1935 text, Black Reconstruction, which you should read in every divinity school, by the way, because Du Bois is probably one of the greatest diagnosticians and analysts of how we understand the wedding of moral, imaginary, theological language and political power with material reality. So you reach back and she pulled down abolition democracy. This isn't anything new. She began to elaborate it. Her conversations with Eduardo Mendieta began to think through what are the dimensions of abolition democracy in relation to the carceral state, a long-time preoccupation of hers because she understood from the Black freedom movement, if you can arrest the body and seek to arrest the mind, then of course you can dictate the regimes and reign of a society. So what we have to do is go back and retrieve those lessons, begin to talk about them, articulate them, see what they mean in our day and time. Here in Texas, you have a plethora of examples going on. Not only those operating of empire, but those who operate to banish empire and retrieve this abolition Christianity moment. It becomes the very gospel that we preach. It becomes the hermeneutic that guides our intellectual skies. We not only read our sacred text, and this is where dear Professor Will Gaffney has been vitally instructive here. But we also read those other canonical texts that may not find themselves in those 66 books of that sacred text. This is where you begin to think something new. Mostly in that lecture, you notice I'm pulling from Amilcar Cabral. I can talk about a critical rememory that comes from Toni Morrison. And of course, that luminous example that we began with about a strong people don't need strong leaders. That comes from none other than Ella Baker, that our sister Barbara Ransby has done a beautiful justice in her scholarship with. So we already have it. The question is, do we fashion the will to do it? And that's what this week is about. This week is about bringing the community of the faithful together to renew and strengthen us to go back out in that journey for another year. And then we'll come back next year, renew and strengthen ourselves, go out those doors, go out into the struggle and continue it, because that is the very essence of the gospel that we have taken up. That's what we're doing. So I just say you're already doing it. Anybody who wants the vision of what that comes, I mean, we know what that vision is. We've already seen that vision, but how it manifests itself in our everyday lives, it's going to be quite different and quite unique and quite new, quite fresh, and it's going to inspire others. Huh? That's the faith. But it's grounded in the greatest of these, love. That is the love.
I'm looking for the hands.
Thank you, Dean. Thank you for your lecture. I was very moved by the scriptures and everything, all the points that you made. My name's Josh. I'm a student at Bright. And you'd mentioned this idea of a non-reformist reform, as well as a abolition democracy.
Yep.
And I'm currently a treasurer for a local judge candidate, someone who has a lot of experience in the incarceration system, as well as a co-leader of a justice reform action group. We spoke at the Commissioner's Court this morning to try and urge our county commissioners to cancel a contract with a for-profit prison in West Texas that's out of compliance with the Texas Jail Standards Commission. And I guess what level of engagement would you, I guess, deem necessary as far as, I mean, this idea of separation of church and state, non-reformist reform, democracy, I mean, it's similar to this idea of envisioning. I mean, where do we go? I mean, are we resetting the table? There's a sheriff who's a sheriff candidate who's a graduate of Bright Divinity, who's running against our local sheriff. His name's Patrick Moses.
Wow.
And so my question is really, can we do this? Can we actually turn the table over while we reset it in these developing stages?
Think about this. This is where our history classes become so important. I would not be here if it weren't possible. Take a look around. 50 years ago, this wouldn't happen. Period. Your dean wouldn't be here. So this is where we have to understand the depth of Ella Baker's call. It's not about a strong people needing strong leaders. It's about recognizing the gift of God in all of God's children and in all of God's creation. Don't need a lot. Don't need many. I'll give you an example. King, after the Montgomery bus boycott, King moves over to Ghana. 1957. Why would Martin Luther King go to Ghana in 1957? Right? It was just a local bus boycott. It was just right there in Alabama. That's it. It wasn't anything major. It was just that. No. It was part of, King would come back, preach at Dexter Avenue Church. He would come back and he would say, we are part of 800 million people in the world struggling for freedom. Don't ever forget that. Don't ever forget what you're doing as part of the freedom struggle all over this world. You are never alone. You're not isolated. We're more interconnected globally than we've ever have been, but yet we feel more isolated than we have been in history. How is that? What's the idea that's saying, oh no, this isn't big enough. This is not going to change anything. We have a wrong vision. King would always say, and Ella would remind him, and Ella would say that the people made King. The movement made him. he would acknowledge that. It wasn't just coming up oh, I got this good idea. This is where abolition Christianity in one element becomes a way in which we form our disposition and our habits. We call that, formation. How are we being formed in these spaces to understand that? What does formation look like? It looks like this in these moments. To open up conversation to say, how is that possible? And then, of course, we have stories here, stories there. I'm sure when you look in this room right here, there's stories everywhere that it is possible. And that's what you live on. That's how you're formed. That's how you're fed. And that's how we move out those doors. You ever seen the Birmingham campaign videos, right? Notice every movement in the Birmingham campaign begins with this movement of formation, of spiritual formation, and then you have the videos of the people marching out the doors of the church and marching downtown. That's what you're doing right here. That's what you did this morning. Yeah, it may be long. It may be hard. As Toni Cade says in A Black Woman Anthology in her wonderful essay on the issue of roles, and I remind everybody should have Toni Cade's edited volume of 1970, The Black Woman in Anthology. We should all read on the issue of roles, because at the end she says, oh yes, there's no such thing as an instant gorilla. There's no such thing as a presto magic protest. This is about struggle, and you have to be formed for that. You have to be equipped for that. This is about long distance struggle. And that's what you're doing. And we do it in the community of the faithful because the ecclesia is our space of refuge, our space of strengthening, and our space of renewal. And of course, we move out. So you're doing that work. Now, this is where Professor Gilmore will remind us we have to then devise non-reformist reforms. It's not saying that, oh, we're going to get the revolution in one day. It's going to be, okay, we're going to get this. Now, how do we move the next step? Because we're not going to get a retreat from this. And then how do we link it with other struggles? See, the struggle right now against the carceral state has not disconnected from the struggles against the military state. It is not disconnected from the struggles of a planetary and rapacious capitalism. This is where the beautiful thing, I just was out there at Claremont giving a talk on King, and I said the beautiful thing about King is he understood the interlinkage of all the movements. And of course, when he gave his speech Beyond Vietnam, A Time to Break Silence, he linked militarism with racism with a rapacious capitalism. How are we linking our struggles? That it's not solo and singular and isolated. How are they linked? The great Ubuntu saying, I am because we are, and we are because I am. I cannot look at Gaza. I cannot look at Ukraine. I cannot look at my brother and my sister in the ghetto. I cannot look at those baptisms on the border without understanding they're all part of what we must fight for to make this world more just, more righteous, and allow the visions of the prophets to come to reality. So.
Nathan.
How do I imagine the functions of the cross? Oh, the functions of the cross is that we've always looked vertically, and we forget those horizontal dimensions. That's why we got to begin with Ella Baker, because it's that horizontal. It's the way in which I want to connect with others. It is recognizing the radical egalitarianism for those who take up the cross. It is a reminder that God is not solely up there. God is also right here. God is there. God is there. It is a fleshed freedom. The cross also reminds you that we have to get with the very fleshiness, the muddiness, the very earthiness of the divine. That God created us. He created all of creation. So the cross calls us not only into community, it also calls us to a new relationship with creation. And the ways in which the cross calls us to that means we have to now ground ourselves right here. It is the beautiness, it is the beauty, it is the muddiness of our existence that we have to get with. See, oftentimes we want to spiritualize these movements, and of course in advanced capitalist societies we have a new spiritualism. We call it spiritual but not religious. Although it has the languages, logics, categories of Christianity, it wants to have a new mysticism while the remainder of the world sits. While we've had serious transfers, I think we talked about a recent RAND study. Since 1975, we've had a $50 trillion redistribution of income from the bottom 90% to the top 1%. Oh, they know it's about the materiality of the material. This is where we got to get back to Irenaeus' understanding, that we get back and focus on that. Focus on this is what we do, and as we come together, we connect in and through the divine. That's the cross, the essence of it. All right.
Do we have hands?
We're good. You're beautiful, and we can go ahead and close, and we can talk more informally.
Do you have a closing word for us?
Closing word will be an open word. God has given us this moment, this breath, this space, and this spirit. Allow what you feel now to inform, guide, and frame you as you continue your journeys now into the long future, with Jesus with us and the ancestors cheering us on and all of the angels walking with us. Amen.
Thank you very much. You're welcome.